going to just do a little short introduction for our speaker today. Our speaker is Professor Dean Davis. He's been on the campus of the Atlantic Union College in the Religion and Theology Department, started back in 1978. Started a few years after I had graduated, so I missed him because I lived elsewhere. But I know his Facebook friends and former students are anxious to hear about how this went today because they would like to see Professor Davis again in action here. So he is going to give us background of this beautiful building, something of what the campus is like, or was like, and how it's evolved. And then after that, we're going to have a tour, probably kind of roaming tour, because we can't really hear if we're all scattered through the hallways and such. So at this point, I'd like to turn over the pulpit, the podium, the lectern to Professor Davis.
Thank you. Welcome everybody to Founders Hall. Most of you have seen the building and have been around the building, but very few of you probably have been in the building. If you didn't work here or were a student here in the past, you probably weren't in the building. It was built in 1884. It is on the National Registry of Historic Places. The outside is Victorian style, and that was the style of the times. I've been here 40 years, so I kind of feel I've been in this building on a constant basis most of the time. And so this feels like almost home to me. Mm-hmm. And since this building is a relic, a museum, I've been here so long that I sort of feel like a relic too. Anyway, I have two books on its history. A lot of you are acquainted with it. One was written by a former student that graduated in the first class in 1888. The New England School by Rowena Purdon, and an auditorium in the library is named after her. The other is by Myron Wetchy, and There Was Light, because the school's motto was Fiat Lux, let there be light. And so he wrote a history a lot bigger than the other one on the history of the school. In the Adventist world, this is basically a world-class museum because it's the oldest Seventh-day Adventist educational building that's still standing. It was not the first one that started. They had one that started in Battle Creek, and it closed just before this opened. It only lasted a couple of years. And this building's been in existence 135 years. So the school started in 1882, 2 years before this building was built. And it started in a carriage house somewhere near the South Lancaster post office. And the person principally responsible for the building, to have it built and to start it, was Stephen Haskell. He brought a teacher that had taught in the Battle Creek School, G.H. Bell. He arrived here 3 or 4 days before school started. He came with one son, never brought the rest of his family, never brought his wife here, and after 2 years he went back home. to Michigan. Also, he had an assistant, which was Edith Sprague, who also came from Battle Creek. And in the first year, the two of them taught. He was, his specialty was English and teaching English and English literature, and also the principal of the school. And the one that came with him was Edith Sprague, and he kind of taught the older and more advanced students, and she taught the lower ones. They also had a part-time teacher. Classes started that first year on April 19, 1882, and they opened school with 19 students present, so that's interesting. It was Patriots' Day, and we started on Patriots' Day. Whether they would be late a couple of days to start on Patriots' Day, I don't know. Myron Ritchie might know. Anyway, a few more students came, and by a little later, they had 24 students that started. The classes lasted for 10 weeks. They felt it was quite successful. You have to remember that most inhabitants in the U.S. at that time lived on farms. And schooling was kind of a thing that most people on the farms didn't put too much value to. And so, particularly the boys, or the males that came, a lot of them would come, and then when spring work was to be done, they would leave and be gone for a while, so they'd come and go. And interestingly enough about the classes, they didn't have formal year for them. So they just taught, he taught the people that were more advanced and knew more English and other subjects and so forth. And Edith Sprague had the people that were either not as advanced or weren't up to speed or whatever. So they obviously had to raise money to start the school. And so when the students came, they were interested in helping. And so they asked for, the males asked for 1 acre of land that they could plant things and sell and hopefully make a profit on and donate the proceeds to the school. The girls also got in on it and said, we'll do the male students' laundry and mend their clothes. Well, the males didn't always appreciate all of it. They felt that the girls were starching too many of their clothes and starching too much. And so the girls decided that they were going to play a prank on them. And so one time they starched all their socks. Well, people were people, students were students back then too. So the next year they started on August 30, and they had 3 terms. They divided the school year into 3 terms, kind of like a quarter system. And they started school in August with 57 students, and by the highest enrollment during the year apparently was about 80. Sometime after they started school, which year I don't know, but they felt that the ones that planned the school and so forth felt that they needed to offer more than just the formal courses of English and math and science and all of that, that all these people, or most of the students, came from farms and so forth, and so they needed to learn practical things along with it. So they started a work program, and they started to teach all kinds of courses which would be helpful for them when they went back home. And so during the time period, how many years, I don't know, they taught tent making, harness and broom making, cobbling, which is shoemaking, carpentry, and for the girls, dressmaking and different household arts. In the spring of 1884, they started construction on this building. And this building was huge compared to what they had before. They started in the carriage house, and then they went to the village church, and there were a couple of rooms in the basement that they used for the second year of school. And the third year, they were supposed to start here. Well, by fall, this building wasn't built, it wasn't ready yet. And so they didn't start school until October 22, 1884. And they changed from 3 terms to 2, which ended up being what they always did after that, kind of the semester system. In this building, they just used it initially only for classrooms. The principal's office was elsewhere, not here. Then they used this building over the years, was used for all kinds of things. It was an administrative building, it was a classroom building, it was a library building. And the chemistry was on the top third floor, top floor, that was never refurbished. And the last group to use it before they refurbished the place and made it the religion and theology building was music. And when they used it for administration, the first office, which is the first one beyond the stairway on that corner, was the president's office. And on this side, this room here, I would have opened it, but I don't have the key to it, was the treasurer's office. After using it for, I don't know how many years, they abandoned the use of the building, and in the 1970s, they decided that they would refurbish the building and then use it for religion and theology. And I came 2 years after that, in 1978, because 1976 is when they started using it again. In the reconstruction or the refurbishing of the building, the story that was told me was they found that the wainscoting, which are the vertical boards on each side of the front door that come up about this high, they counted 19 coats of paint on them. I don't know how they figured out one paint, but it was the same color some of the time. How they could figure that, but anyway, that's the story that was told me. The stairway going up steps The one on the right was the girls' side, and the one on the left was the boys' side. And Mrs. Kilgore, who used to live in the White House, told me that the reason that they had them go separately, well, they didn't want boys and girls to mix. But they said the main reason was, you know, the girls wore long dresses clear down to their feet. And they said, if the girls went up the same side the boys went, the boys could see their ankles. Well, that was changed. Okay, out in the hall, I didn't know it was going to be out there instead of here, was a student desk. We have 4 student desks, 2 students to a desk, because they got lids that raise up and you keep your books on one side and notebooks and so forth. And so one student would sit on the right and the other student would sit on the left. And on the back there used to be a little shelf that was hooked onto the very edge, front edge of the desk. They were made of solid white oak. This college has 4 of those left from the original desks that they had. Now, let me tell you some of the rest of the stuff around here. Right behind me in the corner, you can see it once we finish here. There's a little window that they discovered when they did the refurbishing of the building. There had been a fire in the building in 1907. And they went back in records and found out what the story was. The story was you had a student night watchman who was unhappy with the school or school administration, and so he set fire to broom corn, which was in the basement, because they made brooms. And no, as a student, it wasn't the night watchman. And the night watchman caught the fire. It started in the east side of the building, and there was a big storm brewing at that point. And the wind was driving the flames into the building. And the night watchman then notified the school officials that there was a fire, and they came and looked at it, and they said, there's no way we could put out this fire in a wood frame building with a high wind blowing like it is. And it was in the winter time. And so they came, the story that's told me, they came here, they knelt in the snow just to the left of the stairway in front and told the Lord in their prayer, if you want this building to remain, you've got to do something about it. We can't. And as a result, when they got up from their prayer, they said, all of a sudden, the wind stopped. It was still as could be. And they started a bucket brigade and ultimately put out the fire. And they felt that, well, God wanted this building then. And so if you look back here, you see they have a little window and you can see the charred remains of some of the 2x4s. In those days, it was interesting. A 2x4 was actually 2 inches by 4 inches. Now, they are not. They've shrunk. And that's true of other beams besides 2x6s also, and so forth. So we have a fire there, and you can look at it when we break up from this meeting in this room. On the wall in here is a picture of the Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci, one of the students' mothers. You can't, it's out in the hall. And I just want to explain a bit about it, because artists paint things as they understand it and as they see it, and they paint it as if it's contemporary, generally. Well, the Last Supper, they did not sit around the table. That was not their custom. Their custom was all of the people there in the Last Supper of Jesus would lie on a couch. Their feet would be on the outside, and normally a servant would be there to wash their feet. They propped themselves up with their head with one elbow and eat with the other hand. And they were normally in a kind of a semicircle, and there'd be a low table that would have the food on it, and it would just be a narrow thing with food on it and so forth, and they could reach out with the other hand to get their food and so forth. Wouldn't be anything like what the artist painted or what they normally do, since they normally try to make it look like their times. Okay, now we got 3 display cases out here. On the left, there's a display case, and at the top of it, there are 2 sheets. There are 2 sheets from the original edition of the 1611 King James Bible. And underneath, you find various oil lamps and a cruise for oil. Some of the oil lamps have single wick, some of them have many wicks, up to 4 I think, maybe more. And at the bottom of that display case there's a whole series of Roman coins. The smallest one is what is called the widow's mite, where Jesus observed and the widow put in all of the money that she had, which was a widow's mite. It's very small. And so that's what you have in that one. So we also have a Bible in there, and the Bible was a circuit riding preacher's Bible. It was a preacher that had to go from church to church riding on a horse. And so the Bible is small, about like this. And he would carry it with him on the horse. The Bible, if you open it up, it has London, England, 1790. So it's quite old. Now on this side, you have a display case, and above that you have the plaque that says this building is part of the National Historic Places in the U.S. And on the top shelf, you have a slingshot like the style that was used by David when he killed Goliath. Obviously it's small, but it's the type that you twirl around. It has 2 things, and you hold it and then finally let one side go, and that's where the rock goes. Now, when we had slingshots, when I was a kid, we used small stones. These, in David's time, were about that big. And so that hit Goliath's forehead, and you get hit with a rock about that big, it's pretty rough. Anyway, it knocked him over, and ultimately he kills him. So, we have a facsimile of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are about that high. The real ones are about like that. And it has a miniature jar that they found them in. In the first cave that they found anything in, that the Bedouin found, he found 7 scrolls. All of those are in Jerusalem now, in the Museum of the Scroll. And the building is built like the scroll, and the top of it is like the lid of the jar. You also have a little bit of the crown of thorns type plant, where the spines are about that long, that was placed on Jesus' head. And especially it got the frontal part of his head, which would be the top of the forehead, where the most nerves of your head are. And you find in the bottom shelf on the far left a miniature of a head that's been elongated. And you'll find that in the same thing on the left. We have a bust of Nefertiti. She's the famous black Egyptian pharaoh queen. She has a headpiece on it, so you can't tell it so clearly. But the head is elongated because she is royalty. And for royalty, when the child was born, they would wrap their head and would elongate them. And so that would fix them up so that they would never have to carry loads on their heads like the common people. So you can see it in this little miniature one, and the one on the right that I think would be interesting to you. We also have several tablets there, ancient tablets of clay that has been baked to make them hardened and make them permanent. And right in the middle and the bottom, we also have a picture of Christ made out of the Gospel of John. It was done by a Korean war veteran that was in prison. And so he took the whole Gospel of John and then highlighted some words to end up looking like the face of Christ. And it has the whole Gospel of John there in miniature letters. And talking about miniature letters, there's a microfiche on the display case on the left that is, I noticed, is half covered up. And there's a little tiny magnifying thing to read it with. But it has a whole New Testament on one little tiny microfiche. In the last display case, which is just beyond the stairway on the right, then you have on the far right a miniature of the Gutenberg press, and a picture of Gutenberg himself, who invented the printing press, and the first Bible was printed on that. And then the middle, you have a Bible. It's called a Geneva Bible, dating from 1610. And officially it's a Geneva Bible. But it's called by generally a nickname because of the translation that it has in Genesis 3. When Adam and Eve sinned, they found themselves to be naked, and so they sewed together fig leaves and made themselves, however you translate it, aprons or some sort of clothes, kind of a short type thing. And the translation said they made themselves breeches. So it's called the Breeches Bible. There are several tablets there, clay tablets, that have cuneiform writing on them, an example of that. And in the hall there, or on the opposite side by the drinking fountain, is a pulpit which is made by J.N. Loughborough, who was a pastor in upstate New York. And let me tell you a couple of stories outside of the building. The dormitory was where the dining commons is. But the land in between belonged to Thayer. And he would let students go through there. So Stephen Haskell went down to the town offices and found out what the regulations were. The regulations of the town said you could build a sidewalk, a wooden sidewalk, above the snow line. So he built one from the dormitory down to the street below, came up, and then came up so the students could come to the school building here for classes. And after a year, he and Thayer met in the post office, and Thayer said to Haskell, he said, "Say, Haskell, if you tear down that miserable looking boardwalk," he says, "I'll let the students come in through my land here." So he did, because you couldn't buy big tracts of land, generally speaking. Farms were small, land where houses were was not a big space, and so they couldn't buy very much land altogether to build a school on. So they had to build the dormitories a little further away, and land in between didn't belong to them. Now, in the parking lot, just to the front of the parking lot, as you look at the lawn, when I arrived here, there were 2 rows of white pine, big ones, old ones. And the story that was told me by Mrs. Kilgore was that Mrs. Thayer didn't like, by that time, they had bought the land that belonged to Thayer in between here and the dormitory. And the students would be doing PE, which they call physical culture, out in front here, and Mrs. Thayer didn't like to see that. And so she had this double row of pine trees planted. They had first row, and then the second row was staggered with the first row. Well, by the time I got here, and some years later, the trees were getting big and old and so forth, and finally one great huge limb came down on a car, and so they cut them all down finally. And that was the story of the pine trees. That's about all I have to say here. If you want to look around in the display cases or go back here and look at the fire, you have a little time, and then we'll meet upstairs in the chapel. And if anybody needs to go to the restroom, the ladies' restroom is next to the outside wall beyond the stairway on the right, and for the males, it's on the left. Yes, go ahead.
Miss Kilgore was one of the original Lancaster Historical Commission members, and she put in a lot of effort into when they first started forming together.
Now, she used to come over to, once in a while, she'd bring in a picture or come to tell a story or something to me for years. Yeah, but she died at 106, I think it was.
Did they put any chestnut wood in this building when it was built? I know
I don't
the
know.
Haskell House, when they destroyed that and tore it down and put a condominium building over here, at the time, we had noticed that there were big beams of chestnut, American chestnut, and we tried to save them, but the developer just mashed them up and took them away, which was sad. I just wondered when they did the restoration here, if they had found any.
I don't
You
know.
haven't heard that yet?
Myron Retchinger answered a lot of questions that I can't answer,
I'll
so
have to ask him.
I'm sorry you didn't hear. I recommended him, but he says, well, he's not sure you'd understand all the questions because he's getting deaf, and so
Oh, Myron
he turned it
Wedgie.
down. Because he's a walking encyclopedia. And when you write a history that thick, you got to know something.
When, Professor Davis, when you came to Lancaster, what college did you come from? Did you come from the California area or?
Well, I came from working on my doctorate at Andrews University in Michigan.
Michigan.
But before, I had spent 15 years as a missionary in Brazil. I taught 2 colleges there.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We're free to roam the first floor
Yeah.
up to the second floor.
Right.
Uh-huh.
I'll give you a little time when you're ready to go on upstairs, do that.
Find you if we have a question.
Yeah,
Ask
any
me.
other questions or comments?
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.